try. Here we go. Yeah, this is just an overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to try to cover the basics of everything a little bit, but if you have questions, please just ask. I think it would be good to sort of have like more of a discussion rather than me just projecting all this information at you. So next slide. Yeah, so to start with food forests. So food forests are, I don't know how familiar you are with food forests specifically, but food forests are a type of agroforestry that is kind of complex and advanced in the sense that it really tries to mimic a natural forest ecosystem. So agroforestry is really more scalable in a way. It can have all these different types of shapes and forms, and food forestry is like a very specific form. Because this has gained a lot of ground in the Netherlands in recent years, there has been an institutionalized definition that is recognized by the Dutch government. And that includes that it must really be food production. So you can't just have a food forest and not produce any food. Then you're not a food forest. It needs to have a canopy layer, a minimum of 3 other layers of vegetation, and a rich soil life. More importantly, also, it doesn't have any annual crops, no livestock, so no silvopastoralism, and no fertilizers or pesticides. And it needs to be at least half a hectare in size. And I'm not sure what that is in acres. I always forget whether a hectare is smaller than an acre or bigger.
I already have a question.
Okay. You're going to help me with the whole hectare acre situation.
Hectares are bigger than acres, that much I know.
Okay, then
I don't
this
know
is, I
what
think,
the-
1 acre then.
Yeah.
Okay, because it was either the other way around. I just knew that it was about half. I just didn't know what direction. Anyways.
Okay, so I'm always interested in definitions and who defines them and why. And like in the US, for example, we have 5 agroforestry practices defined by the government because those are linked directly to funding.
Yeah.
Or for climate, whatever it is, there's different programs that fund those 5 practices.
Yeah.
So what is why has the Netherlands made it a definition? Is it because
It's also indeed related to funding. So in agriculture, agriculture in Europe gets a lot of subsidies. And if you are an agricultural business, then you need to have a code for the crops that you're growing in order to apply for subsidies. And you get that subsidy by hectare. And food forests in the beginning, when they just started out, had to do this for every single plant that they grew.
Yeah.
But then, because especially like the more diverse food forests have like 200 species, so it's very like not doable. And then it's like 1 species per hectare or something, so you have to do that for every species by hectare. So now, after a lot of lobbying from the food forestry practitioner side, they accepted this definition. And it's very much shaped by the main food forestry guy who really was very good at marketing and publicizing all these food forestry practices. So it's really definitely also his take on food forestry. And that's not the only one. It's also contested in a way. There's also practitioners who disagree and have chosen to kind of stop using the word food forestry because it's been institutionalized in a sense. And there's other people now talking about complex agroforestry, for example. And they chose that word because it doesn't have the same conditions attached to it as this one does. But then that could mean that you don't get that subsidy, and that's then a choice that you have to make. So now food forests have this crop code in a way. And you can just say like, oh, my crop is a food forest. So then you don't have to list and report every single species that you have. So that's kind of the take on this definition. And I myself, I don't really have like a very strong opinion for or against any definition, but it's, indeed, like you said, is very politicized. So food forests in the Netherlands have, really sort of starting popping up after 2009 when there's this one guy basically started a forest garden that was 2.5 hectares, and forest gardens are a term that originated in the UK with Martin Crawford. And because his forest garden was 2.5 hectares, which, so we're 5 acres, they were kind of like, okay, this is not really a garden anymore, so we want to call this something else. And that's kind of why they started shifting to food forests. And this guy is He's definitely just an activist and lobbyist in nature, and he's really been super prolific in getting food forests off the ground all over the country, basically, and especially now, like it's in national newspapers. There's so much national media coverage on food forests. It's really quite impressive, and most of that I think came from him, and he inspired a lot of other people, and more people have started engaging with food forests. So I started
Who is the guy?
Wouter van Eck.
Okay, I see why you didn't tell us.
Yeah, I can write it down at some point if you're interested. You can. He has a book too, but I don't know if it's translated. So it's like all very Dutch.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. So I published an article earlier this year on kind of like the movement of food forests in the Netherlands. And that's based on fieldwork that I did a year before that. So I found 231 food forests, but this is really only the tip of the iceberg. So even when I was doing it, I already connected with people who already had a constituency of 300 more food forests and forest gardens that they couldn't tell me about because of like private contact information. So I think the real number is probably closer to, I would say, like maybe between like 600 and 1,000 or something like that of people who are doing something. And a lot of these are just like also private, like food forests, especially in the more rural areas in the Netherlands where people have a little bit more access to land. And then they just decide to start like a food forest with that. So most of the food forests are quite small scale. So in between half a hectare or 1 acre and 5 acres. But there's some new projects that are really trying to demonstrate how scalable food forestry can be as well. So that's actually one of the case studies I'm going to talk about today, is a site that is about 40 acres. No, wait, I'm confusing it. There's a reason I didn't go into math. Yeah.
Go on.
It is like, it's 20 hectares.
Okay.
You can do the math.
Yeah. 40-ish.
Okay, yeah. But what they have in common is that they're all quite multifunctional and have diversified income streams for the most part. And I already sort of, was able to explore that through this study. And then the more in-depth extension of this study is the fieldwork that I'm going to present today. So this is, a very basic introduction of food forestry in the Netherlands. So next slide.
That it?
Yeah. This specific paper that I'm still working everything out as we speak, actually. So I just finished up the field work, came here, and here I am. So it's definitely still very much a work in progress. But one of the main reasons for doing this field work and this research is that a lot of recurring critique that food forests receive in the Netherlands is that they're not, quote unquote, economically viable. And I think that's a very interesting critique for many reasons, also because mainstream agriculture is also not economically viable, but no one talks about that. But then I wanted to just kind of more explore how the economic composition of these food forests actually looks like, and how it can sustain and advance people's livelihoods and the people that are connected to it. So what I did was look at how food forestry is performed in the Netherlands, and I picked 4 food forests to sort of stick with. I'll go into the methodology in the next slide. I hope I didn't hide that slide too. I may have, but that's fine. But I looked specifically at the economic activities taking place in and around food forests, how they contribute to the continuation of the food forest, and how they contribute to practitioners' livelihoods. And this is also very much like in line with the diverse economies thinking. So I'll also go into that a little bit more.
Can I ask a random question?
Yes, of course.
What is the term that you use in Dutch? Like, is it exactly the same, or because I was,
Food forest?
yeah,
Voedselbos, which translates to food forest.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the thing. I was just looking at the terminology.
yeah.
Do you have a term in Finland?
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
trying to find all the agroforestry terminology, and it's like, I don't think there is like a proper good established in ecology.
I think, yeah, so voedselbos became like an established thing because people made it a thing, I think. So food forest, the term food forest is not like necessarily new. Like I think Bill Mollison and David Holmgren in permaculture one also talk about food forest. So it's not like a novel term in that sense, but then the Dutch translation was really, I think, yeah, enacted by the people who brought that to the Netherlands and then started working on that. So yeah, in that sense, I think like you can only also have translations if it's like alive for certain people within that language, and then it becomes a
Right.
thing, right? Like yeah.
Right.
So yeah. Yes, next slide. I think, did I hide a methodology slide? Okay, then I'll just talk about this. I have a very long presentation that I also presented at a department presentation at UMass earlier. But they gave me like a really long time to talk. So I made this like huge presentation with literally everything I could possibly say. And then for this presentation, I just hid a bunch of slides because I was like, I don't want to talk for an hour and a half. So anyways, yeah, I may have overdone the slide hiding.
You can still talk about
thing, but I can still talk about my methodology,
Yeah.
but maybe the slide's still coming up. I don't know. Who knows? Okay, I can just start talking about the methodology. I don't need the slides. So with the methodology, what I did for this field work is I did participant observation by working alongside food forestry practitioners for like once a month for a full year. So I had these 4 sites and I went there once a month. So in practice, I had like, yeah, 1 day of work in a food forest every week for a year. And I did that because I wanted to capture the seasonality of food forests and also see what economic activities those seasons would bring along. And that was actually quite interesting to do because when I started out, it was March and there was not really that much other than wild garlic that was everywhere. And then the food forest changed like throughout the whole year. And then when I stopped in March, they had the wild garlic again. And it was like, oh, nice, full circle. It was kind of nice, yeah. So I did that, and during this work, I just talked with the practitioners quite a bit. And I also complemented it with interviews. So I actually found that I already got most of the information that I needed through just working with them and talking to them while we were working. But it was kind of nice to sort of make sure that I got everything right and sort of have this member checking kind of effort through the interviews as well, and have it recorded and have it be like more, yeah, thoroughly documented in that way. So that's on my methodology, and also even though I do have like all these different articles as part of my PhD, everything is still very much like interrelated in terms of the field work. And my whole project is also a participatory action research project. So something like, yeah, some of you mentioned that you were interested in like how to do research about this. So that's why I also am going into it in a little bit more detail. So I did participatory action research, and from like basically right when I started, I've been in contact with a lot of food forestry practitioners and asking about their needs and what they're interested in researching. And I also sort of selected a couple of people to form a guidance committee from practice, from the practical side. So I have my committee, my academic committee, and my supervisors there, but I also have sort of a practical equivalent from practice. And I don't see them as much as my academic supervisors because it does require quite a lot from them already. But I did meet with them like once a year, and some of them have been in contact more throughout, like via email or something. But I had like one organized session a year where I would discuss my ideas with them and get their input and kind of see what they were thinking.
Can I ask you more about the poll
Yeah,
part of it? So
absolutely.
who did you talk to? How did you figure out who to talk to? Did you have existing
Yeah.
relationships with people?
Yes.
And what were they saying their needs were? And then how did you end up working with the 4 forests you did? And yeah, maybe
Okay,
talk
so,
about that
yeah.
more later. But
Well, no, I wasn't planning on it. So it's
Oh.
with the US, yeah. So during my master's, I already sort of was doing some work on food forests in the Netherlands, and I also already got into contact with a lot of people who were doing food forestry. So in that sense, I already had like a little bit of an established network, and I knew quite some people. And I mean, food forests have really proliferated quite a bit, but it's not like a massive world. So you do get to know everyone quite quickly. So in that sense, I sort of knew who the big players were and who to ask, and also that there were some conflicting ideas as well. So I wanted to sort of have like multiple perspectives represented in like a guidance committee from the field. So yeah, that's kind of like how I went about it. And I just contacted like the big shots. Like I contacted Wouter van Eck and he said yes. So like, great. And then some other people as well. So I have like 5 people now that I have just been in contact with. And then one of them I've been in contact with a lot recently because so the article that I'm doing on governance perspective actually turned out that this one really big food forestry guy in one of the Dutch provinces was really interested in this as well, and especially in relation to community food forests, which were really getting big in that province. So him and this other consultant who was giving a lot of trainings and workshops to starting food forestry practitioners on how to navigate kind of the bureaucratic and governance landscape when setting up your food forests. And she has a legal background, I think. So she just knows all the ins and outs of the bureaucratic kind of environment. So the 2 of them actually got funding to set up like these workshops for Dutch civil servants and to give a training to them on how to facilitate food forestry. And we were in touch like this whole time. So we actually ended up collaborating on that. And we just had, unfortunately, it happened while I was in the States. So we had these workshops hybrid and I called in at 7 a.m. from Massachusetts, but it was still like really nice. And we worked on creating a handbook for civil servants as well, which should be about done. And then they're going to be co-authors on my paper as well. So this actually, just like really also worked out for me. This is like, I wanted to do participatory action research, but always keeping in mind, like, you can only do that if there's a need for that. And participatory action research is not always the best option. It can only work if people are willing and convinced that they also should be working on it, because it does require quite a lot from the participants if you're going to do participatory action research. So yeah, in that sense, I think this really like worked out really well. And that is like, I think the most successful aspect of PAR that I was able to do, which I'm not going to like talk about too much today, because the fieldwork that I did here was kind of, it was still like PAR, but in a different way. So here I just like worked alongside the farmer and was really like, just like volunteering my hours and my time to learn from them. And it was more in that way. And in terms of how to sort of make an inventory of like questions that people had after my very first paper, the one on the movement in the Netherlands, I also had one session before I even sent out a survey that I invited like literally anyone I could find to, and like 40 people showed up. And then I talked to them about like questions that I wanted to ask and sort of checked with them like what they were interested in, and integrated that into the survey. Then once I had done the survey and 109 people responded to that one, I had another session discussing the outcomes with them, and also seeing like whether I was interpreting conclusions correctly, but also seeing like what other questions they still had. So I did that. And then with the guidance committee that I met with once a year, I also always like was discussing my ideas with them. And then also my ideas were not like completely out of the blue either, because I had been involved with food forestry already for quite a while. And I knew that this economic viability was like something that people were trying to grapple with. And it's something that's very much like alive. Like a lot of people really get sucked into this and they're like, oh, we must do positivist research and prove the economic viability, like that's like they really go hardcore into that. And yeah, I thought that was a very interesting dynamic that I saw happening. So I wanted to do something with that. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really good segue into the next slide, just to talk a little bit more about what diverse economies thinking is. And I just hi to folks who've joined on, new folks who've joined online as well. And maybe after this slide, we can just check in with everyone and see if people have got questions and any comments, and we can keep going. Yeah. So talk to us about diverse economies.
Yes. So So one of the main things in the diverse economies thinking,
Sorry, before you
there's
keep
a
going.
question.
Yeah, sorry, I got here half an hour late. I don't know how to see the comment in Teams. Can somebody read that out? Or Sabra, do you want to?
I think the chat is like there. If you press that
Oh, thanks.
little
Thank
chat
you.
bubble.
On the technical help. Perhaps you've already shared what is growing on the food forest farm that you think you mean studied. Don't think we've got into the detail yet.
Yeah, I will go into detail about one food forest, but yeah, I mean, like I can give some examples, but there's like in a lot of these food forests, there's 200 species, and I'm also no ecologist, and I like worked there for a year, and I really tried. Like I tried to like learn everything, but it just like I don't know, leaves my brain instantly. But I can list like some examples, and one of them is like figs are really popular. A lot of actually sort of Mediterranean species are doing quite well, surprisingly, especially if you plant them on a like south facing incline or something, or against a building, then they can do quite well. So we have figs, but also almonds and a lot of like these Mediterranean herbs that do quite well. And then some more like traditionally Dutch species would be apples, pears, plums, apricots, also elderflowers, we have a lot. Aronia berries we also have. Also just like brambles, blackberries, raspberries, autumn olive. Yeah, there's just like a lot of stuff. And there's also like a lot of like more yeah, experimental stuff that people don't really know that well. And one is called like the French onion soup tree. I don't know if you've heard of this one. But it's like
tree.
yeah, it's a tree, and the leaves are so yeah, aromatic that actually this one Michelin like chef in the Netherlands didn't want to cook with it because it was too easy. And it was just yeah, if you just like use it to make a broth, it tastes like French onion soup, and it also really smells like it. It's really like it's a really cool tree, and I think it's like mahogany something, Chinese mahogany or something.
Oh.
Mistaken. Yeah. So those are some examples of stuff. Yeah, and also mentioned the wild garlic, which I really like that we also have. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of different stuff.
Sabra, I hope that gives you a bit of an insight, and we can come back to more details as well.
Yeah. So yeah. So what I was saying is like the bottom line of like this diverse economies thinking is to really do an inventory of economic diversity as ethical action or as ethical intervention, because the argument that they have is that a lot of economic activities have been systematically rendered invisible by not considering them as legitimate. And that's also why this critique of economic viability is so interesting, because it really has a very strong assumption about what it means to have economic activity or economic viability, like what is economic. And in that argument, it's always monetary and capitalist economy. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Maybe it's not very capitalist, but it doesn't intend to be. So
I'm curious if anyone has heard of diverse economies thinking or community economies in the room. Anyone is familiar? Yeah, Lucia, Yannicka, and nobody else. Yeah, so it might be good. Anyone on Katie is kind of waving, yeah, giving a thumbs up. Yeah, so it might be good just to give a bit of an overview.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
From where it's from.
This idea about diverse economies was really a critique on political economy, which I don't know if you know political economy. And if not, that's not a very helpful statement. But political economy is really kind of like this more Marxist idea of critiquing the capitalist economy. So yeah, very in a nutshell, it's really about this idea that you have different classes where the working class or the proletariat is like disconnected from the means of production, and then the class who controls the means of production exploits the working class by subtracting their surplus and taking it as their own and using it to make more money. And that's basically like the idea of political economy, is that is like an undesirable situation. It's very much like a systematic critique, and there's a lot more to say about that, but I think I'll leave that at that.
We could maybe say a couple of things if that's okay. just
Yeah.
add to what you said about the these?
No, I'll go into like diverse economies more.
okay.
But this was like the political economy thing that diverse economies is critiquing.
Yeah.
So the idea behind diverse economies was that so this was the term was coined by Julie Graham and Catherine Gibson. Julie Graham was actually at UMass, and Catherine Gibson is from Australia. And the two of them started to work together and decided to write and publish under a joint pen name because their work was so integrated that it couldn't really be separated. And Julie Graham actually passed, unfortunately, but Catherine Gibson kept working under the pen name as long as she was like doing the same work that was just an extension of their joint work already. So yeah, they have a lot of publications, and the scholarship has really, really grown over the years, but originally it really came from this feminist political economy lens. And their idea was that if you take political economy ideas and look at it, we actually find that in the last century, people have been making the same critiques over and over again, but nothing ever changed. So they decided, okay, we need to take a different approach because clearly this political economy criticizing the system is not working. And their explanation for this actually came from a more anti-essentialist Marxist perspective, where they said that if you keep criticizing a system such as capitalism, you actually feed that system and keep it you keep it in existence, you keep it alive essentially just by talking about it, and you make it bigger because you keep talking about this omnipresent capitalist system that swallows everything in its wake. So they were like, okay, there's actually no such thing as capitalism. There's capitalist economic activities, but there's no overarching system that exists separate from us. It's just something that is reenacted and performed every single day by many, many people or other actors, institutions and such. But yeah, so their idea was that we actually need to sort of move away from talking about capitalism as if it does have like its own essential identity separate from the people that enact it. So that's why they came up with diverse economies and really emphasize on this plurality of the economy, to sort of start highlighting economic activities that exist that are not capitalist because they're rendered invisible. And this is also why they took this from a feminist perspective, because a very important example here is housework, for example, that is generally left out of economic calculations, but is actually very, very important to keeping the economy, if we even can talk about such a thing, alive. Because if it weren't for housework, then people wouldn't be able to work necessarily, or the next generations of workers wouldn't be able to be brought up. So that's kind of like how they approach this. And then there's of course a lot of other economic diversity outside of housework that could still contribute to a livelihood. And hereby it's like really important to emphasize like how they see the definition of the word economy. And it's really going back to like the Greek root of the word, which is oikos and nemes or something like I don't know this word, but the Greek origins of this basically translate to household management rather than capitalist money-making enterprise. So that's basically, I think, all you need to know about diverse economies in the time that we have now. So what I decided to do is also include the work of two other people who are also based in the Netherlands, Olga Vincent and Viola. And they actually expanded this work on diverse economies also in light of agriculture, to include these other relations that also are sort of implied in economic activities as well. And they this is also not an exhaustive list, but they made sort of like a start, and I took this starting point to start analyzing my data. One was ontology, so how people perceive time and space and the logic of relation between humans and their surroundings, and also to see like what people think of what human nature actually is. Are people just optimizing selfish beings, or are we more harmony inclined, for example? And then they also added knowledge. So these are more like epistemological questions, like what counts as knowledge. And I think, again, here, this neoliberal idea of economic viability is super pervasive, even in food forestry people who actually don't want to do anything capitalist, because that's why they started a food forest. If you want to be rich, you're not going to start a food forest. So they don't want that, but then still they get sucked in by this critique, and you see that quite a bit. So that is very interesting as well. And then also relation to the state. So is it like a legitimate practice? And here I think the definition comes in. So if you choose to do food forestry, you're legitimate. If you choose to do complex agroforestry or something, then you're not legitimate, apparently, because then you don't have this crop code. And then there's also participation. So there's also like some food forestry practitioners who are just super active in fighting all these court cases around, thank you, around things that are happening at like a local level in terms of cutting down trees or other things that might affect a food forest. So these things are also sort of kind of related to like what economic activities are actually possible, and that's why they included these. So I also use these concepts as kind of like my coding scheme in analyzing my data. That's fine. So this picture is also actually a food forest.
Okay, that was your methodology slide.
Oh, well, we don't need it anymore.
No. We're just wondering if anyone's got any comments or questions so far.
Yeah, because I'm still talking a lot. It's so hard to like be.
Well, you've got a lot. Yeah, you've got a lot to share. But in terms of like the idea of economic viability, for example, do you like folks who are working on agroforestry here? Is that something that you find sort of pervasive as well in the discourse? Like questions about that? Or...
Yeah, I mean, I'm also engaged with complex agroforestry in Brazil. We call it syntropic or successional. And there is a lot of this critique. And it's very interesting because financial modeling actually shows that even from a capitalistic point of view, it's supposed to be more profitable than conventional agriculture. But then for many other reasons, it's not. It's not just because in theory it will be more profitable. It doesn't mean it's easier to reproduce capital through these instead of a simpler system. So there's more complexity there. And people are still doing it, even if not to reproduce capital.
Can I ask, is the idea behind that because you're going to have more diversified products in your food forest, then all these are different income streams or different streams?
Yeah, there are many reasons, but you can have more output with more added value in the same area.
Right.
Theory.
Yeah.
That's a short answer.
It's not my experience. I was in a food forest in Canada, I'll have to say. Yeah. Anyone else want to comment on like the economic or anything that's shared so far, the PAR, or feel like you've got lots of stuff that you want to say?
I might, sorry, I'm going to have to leave soon, but this is fantastic and I look forward to viewing the full recording.
Do you want to share that? Bit about your,
Well, no, it was more of just a question, I guess, because a lot of the viability, there's so many facets to this, the labor, which it looks like you'll get to and so on. But one is it's often measured at just the individual farm scale rather than, enabling ways of coordinating across units or farms or, that piece. But then also it can be so narrowly transcribed around the generation of like a commodity crop, right? Rather than, the whole premise is really sort of a holistic way of relating to a plot, a landscape. And so many of those values are left out of the equation. And I know we all recognize that. I'm just curious if how that's being addressed say here in terms of the viability question.
Yeah.
Thanks, and I may need to sign off soon. I apologize. Thank you.
All right. Well, the answer will be in the recording.
Thanks for joining that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I think, yeah, there's definitely like some truth to it, there being practical barriers to really having this increased productivity in one plot, because I do think there's a lot of extra knowledge required in order to care for specific species, the plant or the products that they yield, how to market them, how to process them, finding different markets for that specific product. There's just a lot of like, I think, knowledge that is required there. And in specialized farming, people do really have all the room and the flexibility to really obtain this knowledge and make the most out of it. But if you do have 200 species, it might not be so viable. So I think in the Netherlands, what I'm seeing now is that people who do want to like take it more seriously to really like market it, there's some people who are saying like maybe we should limit it to like 10 species, because that is still quite a lot, and you can have meaningful diversity in an agricultural system with 10 species, or maybe you have other species but you don't market them, and it's food for more than human inhabitants of that space. So that is still, of course, an option. You don't have to do anything with everything that you grow. But yeah, so in that sense, I think it is definitely something to consider, because it's not super easy to just like actually sell everything that you grow, even though it is a much more efficient use of that plot. Because if you look at monoculture, that's actually very inefficient in terms of space, and especially in a country like the Netherlands where space is and land is so scarce. That's a very important question. And yeah, I grew up among tulip fields, for example, and those are just like ugly barren fields for like 11 months out of the year. Like that's not efficient at all, and we can't even eat them. And it's all for export. So in that sense, I think there's definitely a lot to win through more multifunctional food forestry systems. But if you really want to like use it for feeding people and make it a viable agricultural business, you do have to sort of think about how to market all the different products that you are offering. You can't do everything because it's just too much work, or you need to produce and process everything to an extent that you can actually include more people and have other people who take a role in processing products. Yeah. So then, I'll just like go into one of the case studies examples. And this is actually a really cool example because this is one food forest that really tries to demonstrate this economic viability. That's why it was set up. So there's this foundation that really, that is also led, shockingly, by Wouter van Eck, the main food forestry guy. No, we don't do silvopastoralism because that's, so that's a type of agroforestry, and this is a type of agroforestry that is really strictly mimicking a forest ecosystem. So there can be animals in them, but they just have to be sort of like, they just have to wander in, basically. You can't have like livestock animals yourself. But again, this is like a definition that is like institutionalized. There's also, I have been at food forests where people did have pigs, just not in the food forest, or like sometimes they were. So you can, but like in this food forest, no. And in terms of like the institutionalized definition of food forestry, also no. But yeah, I think everything is possible if you want it to be possible. So, so this voedselbos Schijndel. It was set up by Food Forestry Foundation, that was set up to promote food forestry among agricultural businesses, actually, and trying to convince big farms to sort of convert part of their land into food forests. So in order to tackle this economic viability question head on, they started this food forest, and it's about 40 acres. And yeah, they really did take more of a rational approach to the design here. So they have less species than some of the more romantic food forestry. So these are terms that people use to describe the type of food forest. And a romantic food forest would be the type of food forest that has like 200 species, looks like a natural forest. It's kind of like this Garden of Eden sort of thing. And this is more planted in rows and alley cropping, but still only has perennial species and has a much higher diversity than typical agroforestry systems, which only have like 4 or 5. These still have like 30 or 40. This food forest was set up in 2018. And right when they got the land, they had like an open day for the area. And then one of the people that showed up actually was the CEO of this company, catering company. So they are a catering company that cater for other companies. And they had like a lot of ideas about sustainability and wanting to make their catering company more sustainable. So they were super interested in this. And they kind of said right from the get-go, hey, we are interested. We want to buy your products once you start producing. So they made, like said, they drew up a contract and actually they were just super open-minded and went along with kind of the parameters of this food forest. And they before this food forest started producing, so it's just starting to produce now. It's like 5-6 years old, and that's usually how long it takes for fruit trees and nut trees to start producing. They actually went to Wouter van Eck again, this guy, his food forest, which is one of the oldest food forests in the Netherlands. They went there so they could harvest stuff for their chefs to experiment with, so they could learn what it means to have seasonal products from a food forest and what they could make with that. So they've been sort of slowly transitioning towards using food forestry products for their catering company for the large part. So yeah, that's quite an interesting, I think, example of an economic activity here that is very much based on trust rather than on very fixed conditions and fixed contracts and agreements, because they can't really say like, oh, we only want the apples that like look the most perfect, look the most beautiful, and we want apples year round. If you want to have a collaboration with a food forest, you can't say that because there's not going to be apples year round. And if there are apples, they're going to be the apples that are there, and they're not going to look like the apples, the L-Star you find in like the grocery stores.
So is it more like a CSA type of approach? Like,
so I mean, so CSAs are generally like directly with consumers. So just like individual people that have like a membership or a subscription to like the farm. But here it's just like a contract that they have with the big company that uses it for catering. But I do think they pay for the actual products themselves. So rather than a fixed price. But it is definitely like more of a shared, shared responsibility and shared risk in a way. So in that sense, I think there's like some similarities maybe with the CSA approach. So yeah, I think that like is an interesting element about this food forest. This food forest was also set up in collaboration with the local. So in the Netherlands, you have like different types of governance, and because we are a country that basically should not exist because we're so low in terms of like the water level, we have water boards as an official like level of governance that we also vote for, and they also have like their own jurisdictions. We have a province, municipality, and then water boards is a thing. So this food forest was made in collaboration with the province and the local water board authority, and they're leasing the land from the water board, but they had an interesting setup as well here. So most like lease contracts with agricultural businesses are a 1-year contract, because if you have an annual crop or something like that, you can just up and leave after 1 year and no harm, no foul. Yeah, okay, you have to find a new spot, but you didn't invest like in trees that grow in the spot. So for a food forest, this setup doesn't work because you are investing in this place. You have trees to grow, and that takes time. So if you have to move after 1 year, then yeah, it wouldn't work because you can't even produce anything in that time span. So they set up an agreement for 30 years, which is quite unusual. And this is actually not the longest exception. I also know another food forest that happened later than this one, but it got a contract for 250 years. So yeah, I thought that was just fun to share. But for this one, they got 30 years, and in the first 5 years, they actually didn't need to pay the lease. So they do have to pay it, but they got an extension on that lease, and they only needed to start paying after year 5. And because they are food forests with the code food forests, they got subsidy for the first 5 years. So the first couple years after year 5 that they need to start paying, they can just pay with the subsidy that they got in the first 5 years. So yeah, they have that interesting setup. And in terms of all the plants that they bought, this was through crowdfunding and also government subsidies. So in that sense, it's not like a fully financially independent endeavor in that sense. And they also relied on a lot of volunteer labor to actually plant everything. But now, since last summer, they've instated 2 what they call exploitants. And they're basically people who get to work the land and keep all the profits for themselves. So the idea of this food forest was being able to support at least 2 families. So that it would generate enough of an income for 2 families. And now they have 2 farmers that work this land and that can keep any income that they generate through this collaboration with the catering company.
They call them exploitants.
Yeah, so that's
Wow.
quite interesting, but that is a Dutch word. So I think
okay.
like it makes more sense in Dutch.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, they're exploiting the land, which is, that's an interesting.
That's the same.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that in Dutch. So I know it sounds worse in English.
Yeah.
But in Dutch, it's like an accepted like way to describe someone who's working a land or a piece of
It's
land.
just colonial legacy.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah. The Dutch don't have the best history there, so yeah.
But that is just such an interesting economic setup in the sense that it's a for-profit enterprise,
Yes.
but it's a state-supported, local
Yeah.
authority subsidized. There's all these different economic
Yeah.
relations.
Entanglements.
Yeah, entanglements and relations. And
Definitely.
and then the non-economic ones you haven't even
Yeah.
touched on
Yeah.
beyond that.
Mhm.
So very interesting.
Yeah, and then another interesting part about this is like the top left, or actually just like if the food forest is a bit of like a diamond shape, that top little corner
Oh, sorry.
is like a tiny little square, is a community
Here?
food forest. Yeah, that part.
Yeah.
So the catering company actually donated all the plants for that little piece, and it was gifted to the community in the area. So there's a volunteer team that also works there, and they can basically do whatever they want with that food forest. So they have tours, events, workshops, everything they want. And they do work in that food forest quite a bit as well. They have like these volunteer Saturdays, and then people just work there. And that's mostly like for fun. So it sounds like, I'm calling it work, but the rest of the food forest is very much like a hands-off kind of approach. So people don't need to do that much work. The farmers don't really need to do that much work in the rest of the plot, other than, checking to see like what plants are still like alive, seeing if like stuff is growing well, if something needs to be like repaired, or kind of keeping tabs on things. And then once things start producing, then you really have like this really, really long harvesting season actually that lasts from about March until November. So that's most of their work. But then in this community food forest, there's more stuff to do because the people there like working in a food forest. So that was gifted to them as well. So yeah, I kind of like already talked about all of this without the slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall I keep just to do a quick time check because we're
This was, I think, like mostly what I wanted to talk about for this, but there's like some slides on like the
you kind of, this is what you just talked about, right?
so I talked about this already.
Yeah.
Right here. This is showing up.
Which one did you want?
The one before this.
Okay. Well, Hold on, it's just a little bit. It's a lag. Is it the one with preliminary conclusion?
Yeah, the
Okay.
preliminary conclusions, I think, will be a nice one to end on.
How big was that
This one,
forest? Yeah.
this was 40 acres, and the
Oh.
community food forest in it was like 1 acre.
Okay, so it's pretty big.
There are a lot of food on 1 acre of land.
Yeah, definitely. So if you do, like, especially with these community food forests, which are, by definition, not like commercial, it is really nice how much to see how much you can produce, and people just actually want to work in the food forest. So that it's labor intensive is a good thing, because people like spending their Saturday outside harvesting stuff. Yeah, and there's generally like a lot of people there. Yeah, that's been really interesting to see is how big the need is actually for people to work with nature or something, or like, be in nature, be a part of nature, feel that connection, sort of replenish through their engagement with the food forest. So
Do you have a sense of how many of the, I know, hundreds that you said, and some of them are just small, privately owned, but
yeah.
have like an open community space as part of
Yeah,
their
so
setup?
there's a lot of these like private ones that just don't have that. But then community food forests are really also starting to pop up a lot. And then those are also able to be facilitated a little bit more by municipalities or be part of like the national forest strategy. So we have like a national forest strategy where we need to plant like, I think it's something like 50,000 acres of forest or something by 2040, I think. And municipalities have a responsibility for this. And food forests can actually be part of this. They are forests, and they're also a way of outsourcing management that is necessary for these forests to the community and create goodwill among the community in return. So there's like a lot of options there. And that's also why we have this project with civil servants as well, to also make sure that the civil servants see this too, because all the different governance levels in the Netherlands are not very streamlined. So a lot of municipalities are like national forest strategy. What does that have to do with us? Nothing. We don't care about forests. And then they just don't do it. But then, at some point they're going to get called out by like the national government, like, hey, your municipality needs to plant like a bunch of trees. Where are they? So there's like a lot going on there as well. Yeah. So these community food forests are definitely like coming up as something that's happening. Yeah, and I think that those especially are such an interesting site of economic diversity. Yeah.
Do you feel like that partnership, the conversation with the civil servants is helping them become more aware of like connecting the dots, with
I
the
think
forest
so, yeah.
strategy and
The thing is that like the people that sort of come to these workshops and are like already sort of involved with this are already the ones that are convinced. So it's really about convincing people who aren't convinced yet, and to reach those, that's just very difficult. And a lot of food forestry practitioners really encounter a lot of like a lot of hurdles in trying to navigate the bureaucratic landscape, because municipalities have outsourced a lot of knowledge that is necessary to sort of make decisions about what's ecologically responsible for a certain area. Then there's all these other things that also still pertain to like every single plot of land that we have in the Netherlands. Like archaeology is a thing that so a lot of archaeological research needs to be done before you can do anything anywhere. Actually there was this really big project where they had doing the math, 1,300 acres of forest that they were planting, and they had to do archaeological research for the whole thing. And they actually dug up a bunch of like mines from the Second World War that were still there. So you really have to do this, because otherwise you dig and I don't know what could happen, like you have to do this. So, but municipalities have outsourced all this to like all these private agencies because it's cheaper, capitalism, whatnot. So that's quite difficult. So then, all these municipalities or this individual civil servants are like, oh, you have to go there. And then another person says, oh, but you have to go there. This person is in charge. And then no one's really in charge. So people get sent around and bounced around quite a bit. And then there's also the problem that within these levels of governance, that there's always like a strict separation between the physical domain and the social domain. And especially with community food forests, they're like smack dab in the middle of both domains. So then people don't really engage with each other. And then like, yeah, land is like a whole other department that also is also fully disconnected from these domains. So it's like a whole mess in government. Yeah.
Anyone have comments on this, or any reflections on the context you're working in as well? Questions, clarification?
Sure. Hi.
Huh? Well,
Sorry, I'm late.
that's okay.
No worries.
My name is Megan Giroux, and I run this organization called Norleys Commons, which is an agroforestry research and education group. We're based here in Vermont. We work throughout the Northeast and in Wales. And I'm actually coming to your university to do some research. So
Awesome.
I saw your name and I was like, I'm gonna get over there. And I've always wanted to come into the agroecology department and just hear what's going on with agroforestry. So I was very excited and glad this is being recorded. Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is a deeply interesting subject, relevant to our area here. Yep.
Nice.
Question about like people who take on agroforestry, because I mean there is a time for the food forest to grow and everything, but how about the time for learning, and how and when does the learning happen?
Yeah, good question. Yeah. Because food forestry is like such an experimental practice in a way still, it's mostly very privileged people that are able to do this. They're generally also a bit older. More young people are starting to come in because like university courses are being offered now. So people are starting to sort of get recruited a little bit more early, but then especially in like the first food forests, it was generally always people who already had like some income to spare. Yeah, where they could risk it, because you need quite some seed capital in order to buy all the plants, buy some land, or lease land. And you don't know when you're going to get it back, and it could take a while. And quite some people found interesting ways to sort of bridge this time. So yeah, people start offering other services. Like one of the other food forests that I went to also has a meeting venue on site, and they do have like an annual vegetable garden too. And then they do catering on site as well. So they kind of like have this, they have a food forest, but it's part of like this multifunctional bigger enterprise where they also have a meeting venue, catering service, and this market garden in a way that they use for that. So in that sense, there's definitely ways to sort of bridge this first 5 years where you're not going to have anything. But still, like, there's no bank that's going to give you a loan for this as of yet. So it needs to either have crowdfunding or you just need to have your own money. So I think, in that sense, it does kind of, make that it's there. There's not a lot of like diversity among food forestry practitioners, unfortunately. But then, again, maybe in the future there will be. There was another paper. Now I remember. Okay. I'm also doing a paper on actually diversity and how food forests and the different plant species that are used can actually be a gateway to have more inclusion and diversity on food forestry sites. Because we have a lot of like migrant communities in the Netherlands from the two main ones are Moroccan and Turkish immigrants who came here in the 60s, 70s as worker migrants. And they've since established, they've been in the Netherlands sometimes for generations already, but they still, kind of live very segregated from the rest of like the Netherlands in that sense. And the one very interesting thing is that they actually really like a lot of or eat a lot of the things that are grown in food forests that a traditional Dutch cuisine would not include, like chestnuts, for example. Like these communities go to like actual Dutch not food forests, regular forests where we have a lot of chestnuts, and they collect them for consumption. And when I grew up, I collected them to display and watch them rot, which is just horrible. And I actually tried chestnuts like earlier this fall and they were amazing. So we definitely like should be eating them. And I feel like there's like a lot to learn from other people's cuisines if we want to actually have like this protein transition towards things that can be grown in food forests, for example. So in that sense, yeah, I collaborated with a student who had a more of an ecological background, and we did like a diverse economies meets ethnobotany type of project. So that was, yeah, really cool. And I think there's quite some things to explore there.
Yeah, I mean, on the learning thing, so I was part of a small food forest. I don't know how many hectares it was. It was 4 acres. Mathematician. 0.2 hectares. So this is like in the interior of Canada, in British Columbia, and this kind of in the south. So yeah, it's like temperate forest ecosystem. And it was some friends of mine, like my herbalist teacher from the coast, who bought this already established food forest. So it was 4 acres. It was mainly hazelnut trees, and the hazelnuts are about 15 years old. And it was interplanted with different kinds of fruits, Asian pears, sugar plums. We had mulberries, we had vine kiwis. Actually, the guy, Richard Walker, who planted it, had a nursery. So that is how he made his money. He did not make his money from the food forest, like from the produce, but from the nursery of the seedlings. There were several plants in there. One was a cornelian cherry that was being, not the ones on the property, but that plant was being researched by the University of Maryland for its cancer fighting properties.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we had different kinds of herbs in there. And so when my friend Sarah and John took it on, my partner at the time, and we 4 of us formed like a workers co-op. And we were like, we're going to process these hazelnuts. We're going to make nut butter. We're going to make hazelnut milk. And we're going to make all this stuff. And then we're like, oh, we don't really have enough hazelnuts to, like the economy of scale just wasn't there. We didn't have any infrastructure.
Yeah.
John was a bit of an inventor, so he like tried to put together this machine that you could throw the bags of hazelnuts in and it would turn, and there were these spikes on a drum that would like try to grade the hazelnuts, and then that really failed. We were like, we had them in burlap sacks. We were driving over them with the truck trying to crush the
Yeah, it's
cells.
really hard.
And in the end, we were just like, we realized that we cannot make any money from this. Like not from production, like per se, right?
Yeah.
But because Sarah was a herbalist, well, there were so many plants in there that could be used for medicine. So she was gathering a lot of plants for medicine. And speaking of the cultural diversity part, that was super interesting too, because that part of Canada has a big Doukhobor community. And the Doukhobors were like a Christian pacifist sect from Russia who were exiled by the Tsar, like really random stuff, but they did settle in that part of British Columbia, and there were a lot of plants, like things like sea buckthorn and different plants that were from their cultural background. And we had a lot of friends, speaking of co-learning, who would just come and spend time, and we had a lot of social gatherings and a lot of work parties, because the forest needed a lot of work. Just maintaining those hazelnut trees took so much time, and like trimming everything, and then once you've harvested, then you have to process stuff. Like I think you've all worked in farming in some way, right? So you know how much work it is. We didn't make. I mean, we took stuff to the farmers market, little bits of stuff, but it was but the other things that we tried to do was create like a learning garden. So we would have people come in and like take them through and show them in demonstration. But again, we did it for free. And, you know, they were both older, definitely, like, but Sarah was working as an educational assistant. John was working like in craft service for the film industry for a really long time, and then eventually retired. So he had time, you know, but the forest itself was not. It was a source of a lot of wonderful things, but not really a central source of livelihood. It was part of a diversified life. So, yeah. If anyone else has experiences to share on their forest.
Can I ask a question? I think like the land piece is so important, land access, and I think that's what we come to in this region a lot, because it's like one of the most expensive places to own land. It has like a very low diversity in terms of identity of who owns land, and I see a lot of parallels in like the ways in which people who want to start food forests really have to get creative around policies and incentives. And it seemed, my question is like, for in general in the Netherlands, do people, is like renting land or leasing land through the government a really common practice to access land for farming? So I feel like here it is, but it's often through like private leases, and there's some ways in which like, you know, agricultural conservation easements or other programs that are initiated by the government, people can utilize to access land, whether it's like, yeah, usually like municipalities or states, but it's not, a lot of people don't know about that unless they're like in that world. But I'm wondering what it's like, just in general for
agricultural
farmers.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of them lease the land from governments, yeah, but then it is a private lease, and there's some farms do have like these really long-term contracts because they've just been there for a long time, but for a lot of them, it's just like an annual contract that gets renewed, and if the government needs this land for something else, you're gone, you know, like, and that's also why a lot of the farmers are so mad, because they're being bought out by the government because we have a nitrogen issue, which is like, we have like the worst nitrogen issue of all of Europe. Because we have the most agriculture of all of Europe, even though we're a tiny country, like it should really not be us, but okay. That's the situation. So yeah, the farmers are pretty mad because they're being forced off the land, and the government does have that power because they're leasing from the government for a large part. Yeah, they don't really generally own the land themselves, especially for businesses. But then with these food forests, there's more people that actually own the land. And there's also quite like some estates that we still have that just have land, and then there's people who want to do something with that land, and sometimes they meet each other, and then like other like a foundation or something, or a group of people from the community can manage like a piece of the land that is owned by someone else. There's some like those kinds of constructions that you sometimes see, or they also lease from the government, but then yeah, a lot of the people that are doing these food forests are generally not farmers and also not entrepreneurs. They're just idealistic. And they come to the government and they're like, give us land. And then the government's like, no. So that interaction is very interesting as well, because the people that like, yeah, there's also like some examples that I've heard from civil servants where you're like, oh my God, how can you even like have the patience to work with these people? Because they didn't want to do anything. They didn't trust the government at all, but they wanted the government to do literally everything for them. So that's like an interesting opinion to have. And then they wanted to like have like a shaman like sort of legitimize the contract there in like a ceremony, and then the shaman didn't trust it, and then they didn't trust it anymore. It's like, oh, there's just like it took like really long to get that. Like at some point, the civil servant that they were working with was just like, okay, you either sign or you don't. But if you don't, then it's done. You know, like you have like really like try to make it your way like long enough. But this is where we have to draw the line because this is costing a lot of money. Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting stuff happening there because people are just like super idealistic and yeah, don't really necessarily know why the government works the way it works. So to them, it's just slow. But yeah, the government does have, of course, like a responsibility to represent everyone's interests and not just people that want something from them. So yeah,
Interesting.
we kind of, yeah, we have no time left.
No, that's okay. Sabra, do you want to, I see you've put some stuff in the chat. Do you want to jump in? Do you want to speak about what you wrote in the chat? Do you want me to read it out? It'd be great if you wanted to or could. Are able to sure if they can.
Hi. Hi. Yeah,
Hello.
sure. Good. I just couldn't get my screen to shift to where I could get the
No
microphone.
worries.
Yeah, hi. Well, we didn't really know what a food forest, the name. I'm certainly aware of permaculture. We did start growing, putting in chestnut trees 36 years ago. And so we do have, in Vermont, we do have fruiting chestnut trees. And I started laughing about the hazelnuts because, I mean, it is, always the problem of like, okay, so you've got the crop and then what do you do with it? So we planted an orchard. We make hard cider and brandy and apple balsamic vinegar, all certified organic. So that's, orchards are agroforestry and food forest or whatever. But I guess what I put in the chat was this thing about chestnuts, because it is very exciting. I mean, the only positive thing of the climate warming in Vermont is that, the chestnuts can more different kinds can be grown here. We're one zone warmer than we were 40 years ago. And it's recognized that species are moving northward. But what I put in the chat was that I read that even in Italy, where people love chestnuts, and certainly in southern Italy, produce a tremendous amount, they're still only something like 2% of the Italian diet. And so there's excitement now all over, people growing chestnuts and putting in chestnut orchards. But just to be aware of what it's going to take, like the lag time for Americans to start consuming them, and the process, the work of that. So that's all I put in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, one interesting thing, like maybe last comment, is that I did just go to Big River Chestnuts, a chestnut farm in Massachusetts, and they produced like 600 pounds of chestnuts last summer, and they said that didn't even meet the demand for them. People were just buying them, and all the chestnuts are gone. They have roastings every Saturday, and they were going to go well into November. They already have to stop because they ran out of chestnuts. So I think, like, yes, there is like definitely a lag time, but then I think people are also can be very interested in like trying out new things. And yeah, I think chestnuts were doing really well in Massachusetts. So I was really surprised at that.
That's promising.
But yeah.
Where are you based, Sabra?
Oh, central Vermont, in Vershire. That's really exciting, the idea that they're having roastings, because that's part of marketing. That's like a taste.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've heard the same thing about pawpaws, that they don't keep very well, but the pawpaw farmers have these open pawpaw days, and people come and try them, and pawpaw festival sort of thing. And that they sell a tremendous amount of pawpaws like right off the bat doing that. So that's all, that's what's necessary. I think in the Northeast we're in a different little pocket here. Like I just think of New York City, and walking in this time of year where there are Italian chestnut vendors selling little bags of roasted chestnuts, and how I think that's wonderful. That's great news. So that's good.
There is, just for reference, there is the chestnut market is actually is taking shape here in the Northeast, because there's a lot of private and public funding going into chestnut processing. So yeah, we haven't done the social science piece on the other end, and some of the economic modeling isn't there, but there is money going into that crop. Yeah.
I think also to bring back like the chestnut, because like they did like the chestnuts that are being grown now are GMO chestnuts that are 99% like a North American chestnut and 1% Chinese chestnut, because all the North American ones like sort of perished from blight. Again, not an ecologist. But yeah, so they have this GMO chestnut that now is able to grow here again because all the chestnuts were wiped out.
That's not what we grow though. We grow Castanea mellissima and hybrids. I mean, we're all trying to grow that again, but mostly what's being planted in landscapes is mellissima and hybrids.
Okay, so in Massachusetts, they were all using this GMO chestnut.
Yeah, Jono Niger.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
anecdotally, those guys are at like every conference.
Like
everyone, they have a booth there.
There's good marketing.
Phenomenal amount of chestnuts going in the ground right now in the Northeast. It's like really the #1 tree crop being planted.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I think we could like officially wrap up, but we can just keep chatting. So I know you didn't get a chance to kind of.
I mean, I did mention on it like for quite a bit, and it's been on here. So if you like want to look at it in the recording, or I can also share the slides. Which have a ton more information. I also saw in the chat that someone asked if I could like share more resources about diverse economies, and I'm happy to share that. And the paper that I already published on food forests.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.
Thank you.